It takes less than an hour to donate blood. We've got 8 pints in our bodies, so losing 1 pint isn't going to make much difference. The body makes it up again within a couple of months or so, but just 1 pint of blood can be a lifesaver for somebody. When we give blood, it's divided up into its main components. Plasma, which is a source of factors 8 and 9, vital elements in making the blood clot. Red blood cells, which are used in surgical operations and transfusions, and platelets, which are used in treating leukemia and other blood diseases. For people like Ken Wright, these donor centres are absolutely vital. Ken knows if he has a serious accident, he'll die if he doesn't get factor 8 quickly.
Ken and I have been married 30 years, and he was diagnosed haemophilia soon after we started going out.
Ken?
Uh-huh.
Will you be back to lunch?
No, I've got this long meeting with Sid on at lunchtime.
So do you think you'll eat tonight?
Haemophilia is an inherited blood clotting disorder, and it affects about 1 in 10,000 of the population of the United Kingdom.
Ken also suffers from a severe allergic reaction to penicillin, a reaction which could be fatal.
It was then suggested that he join something like MedicAlert, so that they would be aware of not only the haemophilia, but the fact that it was quite important that he was allergic to penicillin.
Normally we injure ourselves, and after a while the blood clotting mechanism begins to work, and small strands of fibrin, rather like straw, one of the blood clotting factors, bind the whole thing together and stop the bleeding and allow the blood to flow again. Haemophilia is due to a lack of factor 8 in the blood, and it's an essential factor without which the blood really won't clot properly.
My greatest fear has always been, with the amount of travelling that he does, that he would have an accident and the MedicAlert disc not found.
In this reconstruction, Ken Wright, his wife Margaret, and his colleague Sid Start are played by actors.
I've known Ken for about 15 years, and for the last 12 months we've been working very closely together on this project, and it needed us to attend a very important meeting. I knew Ken was a haemophiliac, but it's something that you just don't sort of tend to talk about. Very successful meeting. It looked as though we were well on our way to achieving what we set out to achieve, that was getting the order for that particular job.
Oh, really? My blood sugar level is pretty low, but my heart is high. I don't know about you.
We left the company about 1:30. Ken was going to drop me off at Thurrock. This is where my car was. We were going to have a bit of lunch and then talk about various different things, and he would go his way and I would go on my way.
I'm starving. All that tea is just swelling around inside me.
Out of the blue, there was this bang. I can remember the car flipping over. And then there was a sort of a pause for about 3, 4, 5 seconds. And the next thing I remember is actually coming to as we were upside down. And I just thought to myself, when are we going to stop? It was very frightening, very noisy. All you could hear was just us going along on the roof with glass, grass, any mortal thing just coming in. When the car came to a halt and I said, "Ken, are you okay?" there was no response from Ken at all. And I sort of panicked a bit and thought to myself, well, I've got to get myself out of this car. Went round to Ken's side, said to Ken again, you okay? There was still no response, and tried to get his door open. At that time, I didn't know what was wrong with me, whether I got anything broken, what the extent of my injuries were. All my thoughts were, what's wrong with Ken? How can I get him out of that situation?
When we actually arrived at the incident, the car was on its roof and the grass verge on the side of the ride. It didn't appear to be that badly damaged from where we were standing or where we actually pulled up.
Oh, I don't know, I don't like look at this one. I think we're going to lose this one.
He was bleeding from the eyes, nose, mouth, head. There was a lot of blood in the vehicle and he was bleeding very profusely.
What's your name? Talk to me. Don't go to sleep. Talk to me.
All this time he was drifting away very, very slowly.
All right, Ken.
But he was actually getting worse, actually, while he was sitting in the vehicle.
Can you hear me, Ken?
The helicopter emergency medical service was already in the area and was diverted there. They didn't know that Ken was going to require highly specialist and urgent treatment from a haemophilia centre to stop his bleeding, and that by sheer chance their helicopter would be the quickest way of getting him there.
Well, when we arrived, we found him upside down in the car, unconscious, having clearly suffered a head injury, with the other indication that he was bleeding from one of his ears, which is very frequently associated with a fracture going across the base of the skull and into the ear. And the main worry that I had was that he probably had suffered a cerebral contusion. This is a bruise to the surface of the brain, and basically is like any bruise anywhere else. It involves damage to the small blood vessels in the tissues and bleeding, in this case, from small blood vessels into the substance of the brain itself.
What I'd like to know is if Ken's all right, because...
Yeah, Ken's going to be all right, don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
One of the things that some people think is that cuts are going to be a big problem in haemophilia, but actually that's not usually the case. The most important type of injury really is blunt injury, and that can occur to the abdomen or to the chest, resulting in serious internal bleeding, or of course it can occur within the skull, resulting in brain damage or even sometimes death.
Airway still okay, is it?
Yep, it's fine.
Good.
All right.
The problems we faced initially were to maintain the safety of his spine and to make sure that his breathing passage or airway remained open. Now, the normal way of doing that would be to insert a tube into his trachea, that is his windpipe, through the mouth as you would do in an prior to an operation. But with his position in the car, him being upside down and head down, it would not have been possible for me to do an oral intubation in that way, and he would therefore have had to have had a tracheostomy, which is a surgical airway or a small incision in the front of the neck and insertion of a plastic tube directly into the windpipe.
There's no doubt that a tracheostomy can be a life-saving procedure at the roadside, and if it has to be performed, it has to be performed. If somebody with haemophilia was in this situation and the haemophilia wasn't understood by the people at the roadside, then there'd be no problem to begin with, but in a matter of minutes or hours it would become apparent that there was excessive bleeding from such a tracheostomy site, and that could of course be quite a problem.
Hello, Margaret Wright. Oh, hello, Jackie.
When I got off duty, I'd just got in and the phone rang, and it was Jackie, Ken's secretary, telling me there'd been a bit of an accident.
I have to get him out, Charlie. I'm going to have to pop the seatbelt, just drop him straight down.
At this stage, he was semi-conscious. He appeared to be that we were going to lose him shortly if we didn't do something about him.
Have they found his disc? Do they know he has haemophilia?
It's clear, we're ready to drop him when you are.
Okay,
You ready,
mate.
Charlie?
So it was whether to make the decision to get him out of the seat and lower him down.
Got him, mate, yeah.
Give me the number.
Okay. Well, the MedicAlert disc was found round his neck and influenced my decision as to whether to do a tracheostomy in the first case, but also, of course, knowing that he was a haemophiliac, regarded the way we dealt with his head injury. And it was a matter of considerable urgency to normalise his clotting and therefore arrest any degree of bleeding that was occurring inside his head. And therefore we put it as a top priority to get him and Factor 8 together.
It took only 5 minutes to fly Ken to the Royal London Hospital, the closest place with a haemophilia centre. His wife still didn't know that his MedicAlert disc had been found.
A&E, please.
Being a nurse, I just could not believe the fact that it was a bit of an accident, but yet he'd been airlifted, so I knew it was serious.
Do you know he's allergic to penicillin and he has haemophilia?
They could have seen the bleeding, even if they didn't know he was haemophilia. But I know that being given penicillin would have been fatal.
He was in the car for about 15-20 minutes. When we first arrived, he was unconscious with a Glasgow Coma score of 3.
Right.
But that's now improved to 13 when we measured at the top of the lift.
He's bleeding from his right ear.
Right there.
Yeah.
One of the other things that was particularly valuable for us in using the MedicAlert disc was that we were able to telephone the hospital where Mr. Wright is usually cared for and get more information about his condition so that we could choose the right treatment for him.
Excuse me, can you tell me where Mr. Ken Wright is, please?
Once we'd given the factor VIII concentrate, it was then very important to know whether or not there had been any abnormal bleeding within the skull, and a scan was the next thing to do, as we would for anybody who'd had this type of head injury.
Absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Very lucky.
My first impression when I saw him, I thought, this is more serious than I imagined, because he just looked so dreadful, and he was still bleeding.
Yep, we know all about that. We've had the doctor down.
I looked to see what fluids he'd got up, and I said to the nurse, he is allergic to penicillin. Yes, she said, we know all that. So I still double-checked, because I could see he'd got drips up, and I just didn't want anything else to happen.
There is a very fine line between life and death. And in a split second, you're not quite sure what side of the line you're going to go. I really don't remember too much about it, and still can't. It's totally gone from my mind, and maybe in some cases that's not a bad thing. It's extremely difficult to put into words what you feel about people who save your life. I mean, the emergency services are just terrific.
6 months after his accident, Ken took his grandson to meet the HEMS crew who'd helped to save his life.
Oh, very pleased to meet you after all this time.
Ken, isn't it?
Yes,
Oh,
Derek, hi.
A little bit better than I last saw you.
Well, I don't really remember meeting you last time, but thank you very much.
But at the end of the day, in my particular condition, when you've got haemophilia, all of that expertise has to be channeled into a certain direction. I mean, I could have gone up the wrong road and gone to a hospital that didn't know I was a haemophiliac. And we're playing for seconds. You've not got hours to play with, it's seconds. And when you're dripping blood all over the place, you're draining off fast. And all of that is brought together with that little disc around your neck. MedicAlert, I mean, if it hadn't been for the little disc, well, they wouldn't have known.